1. I was hired as a mechanical engineer at a place that made machines to test computer chips. These were robotic sorting machines that first picked the parts from a tray and then put them into a boat. Then the boats ran around a conveyor system and were temperature conditioned to the test temperature, then tested, then brought close to room temperature, then sorted into their sort categories. So the new manager, Mr. Arrogant, his name was Tom G., was hired, a tall, good-looking and arrogant man of the privileged class, you know what I mean. I didn't report to him directly, but secondarily. Dotted line, as you will. Due to attrition from the dot-com bust, I was responsible for the conveyor system of this machine, which was being cost-reduced in a new model, the second-generation model with more features but cost-reduced. Like that'll work. Anyway, this guy was the king of not being responsible directly for anything. His skill was design review attendee. He didn't manage anyone or anything directly, but he attended every design review. He studied them all, and every one he would find a flaw. Then he would pounce, fuck you up, find something you or someone did wrong, wait for the right time, and ha-ha, you screwed up. Look how stupid you are. Then he would exit with a strut looking for the next design review. I'll try to explain the context. So I inherited this design that was screwed up. Whoever designed it decided to change the design in a way that it wouldn't work. It would take a bit to explain fully, but long and short, this system is, at its heart, a temperature chamber with a conveyor running around its rectangular track. Hot temp set point was 160 degrees centigrade, which is 320 Fahrenheit. Cold set point was set with liquid nitrogen, which was minus 60 centigrade, or minus 76 Fahrenheit. All normal materials expand with heat and shrink with cold, and the new conveyor was aluminium. It was mounted differently, and the end stops were mounted directly to the conveyor itself and moved about 0.08 inches to 1 millimeters hot and 0.04 inches 1 millimeter cold. But the alignment needed to be maintained to about 0.03 inches, 0.08 millimeter, for the system to work. The old system did this by making the end stops mount to the base plate of the machine. The new end stops mounted on the conveyor in the chamber and moved with the conveyor as the conveyor got hot or cold. This avoided extra holes in the chamber. I explained to Mr. Arrogant Dotted Line Boss that this wasn't going to work. I calculated it, drew it in CAD, and had worked on parts feeders for the last 5 years in machine automation for robotic assembly. He dismissed me, called me young and inexperienced, and "You don't know much," and "We held a design review, so you don't have the authority to change it." Fine. I wrote down this quote and the date in the lab notebook, CYA. Per Mr. Arrogant, Tom G., I am not to change the design. I also drew the ideal conveyor design and put it in my desk, and went back to work. 6 months later, with the system being a jam-o-matic, I roll on in, and walk past a meeting with VP, Tom, my boss, a couple engineers, and some others, and they have a conveyor sketch on the whiteboard, and Tom is discussing the conveyor and how it is jamming. I'm called in as I walk by. "What do you know about this?" says my boss. "Let me get something." I run upstairs and get my lab notebook, and a cup of coffee. Well, I advised that the conveyor be changed a long time ago, but Tom rejected it. "See here." I give it to my boss, who read it, and he passed it to the VP, who read it, and said, "You run it. Go fix it, please." It took another year for his incompetence to be recognized to the point he was let go. He was made to manage a project for real. He refused. He was then made to, or else. He ran it into the ground and was terminated. Total worthless jackass. Fuck you, Tom. 2. It's late, and I just remembered the awesome malicious compliance on a group project for my business degree at Polytech about 9 years ago. It was my second semester. The paper was business computing. It was a compulsory paper for business students, think accounting, marketing, and management majors, and the information technology students, which was an entirely different degree, but both had this same core entry-level paper. I tried to get across credit for this paper based on my skills and programming qualification, but no joy. We were put into teams of 5. I found my notebook, and it says we had to deliver a presentation, website, social media profile on Twitter and Facebook, write a research report, and back that up with a spreadsheet containing charts. Yeah, basic-ass shit. This assignment is worth 20% of our final grade, and another 5% was writing a reflection on what working as a group taught us. I'll circle back to that. Half the assignment grade was not in our content or delivery. What it was based on is having 30 or so marks to hand out to the other team members based on their perceived performance. Minimum of 10 marks, or 10% of your final grade, could be given to another team member, I think. The marks and the rules are a bit hazy, but what we did isn't hazy at all. Sure enough, like any group project, 3 of us did all the work and 2 didn't even front. Not even for the final deliverable of the presentation. Pity. If they had made our practice beforehand, they would have wised up to our plan. Myself and the 2 others worked out we could all award each other 10 points, and the 2 project freeloaders whatever was left. But there was nothing to say we had to give them points, so we didn't. So sure enough, we all patted ourselves on the back, nailed the deliverables, and scored full marks on the assignment. The other 2 didn't even manage a passing grade, and had to retake the paper the next semester. I didn't see those 2 students around after that. Remember that reflection? I wrote in mine about how the system could be rigged and people could get grades for doing nothing if they hadn't wised up to the system. Then as a team, we voted strategically, full marks. And the absolute kicker. I finished the paper with a final grade of 99.5% and took out the Top Student Award along with the $500 Top Student Prize. So stick that, Mr. Dean of Business School, who said I don't know enough about computers to get a cross credit. You now had to pay me $500. It was the second argument that year that he had lost to me. 3. We just moved from a wealthy borough, the kind that does outdoor dining every week, and it is a very nice place, but they are very sheltered from poverty. This story was 3 summers ago. There was a church at the corner of our street. The building is a cherished icon in the borough. It doesn't bring in enough money, and the pastor and his family live in poverty and drive their 2001 Dodge Neon to the building daily to provide services to the community. It keeps the community sober by holding AA meetings. My husband and I have gotten to know them. They are really nice, selfless people. During the summer, we were up one night, and we could hear what sounded like moving trucks at 11 p.m. until 12. We didn't know what it was, but we shut our windows and went back to sleep. We asked the pastor about it. Honestly, out of concern for their security, what if they were getting robbed? He said there is a local homeless shelter that run out of space sometimes, and these homeless are only sleeping on the hard floor mats until 7 a.m. when they leave. After this, our neighbor came up to us and asked us if we could sleep through all of the homeless going into the church. We said we could after we closed the windows. He said he likes to sleep with his windows open. That's fine, but we live in a small borough where a lot of people live around us. Drunk people walk down our streets singing some nights. The homeless came again. They weren't as loud this time, but after the pastor came to us, he asked us if we were being disrupted by the noise. We said no. The neighbor was coming to the pastor threatening to go to the borough about the homeless, with intent on getting the homeless banned from visiting the church. I told the pastor this neighbor is wealthy. He could comfortably close his windows for one night, just so 20 homeless could have 4 walls for a few hours. Then the neighbor stopped me and said, "The pastor had the nerve to tell me to shut my window. I told him to make the homeless use the other door." The homeless had to use the other church door, which now meant they had to carry large duffel bags through a maze of thin pew aisles in an old church. Some of these homeless were disabled and elderly. It seemed out of my hands now. The neighbor did live right next to the church. I just thought it was entitled of him to be so close-minded. He kept his windows open, and the pastor was still under stress of his request. The neighbor also complained about the AA meetings and the parking during the church hours. He was a retired, young 57-year-old and never left his house. He drank on his porch every night, and would always have phone calls on speakerphone outside in the street when my husband got home from work. "Neighbor is talking to someone important again, I guess," he would tell me. He would stop my husband and ask him how work was, and then say, "I don't miss any of that." He only stayed in conversation if it was about him. He worked at Under Armour and was on a college football team for a semester. And then I was out back one night, and there was this bird that wouldn't stop cawing. I noticed it was every night, all night, and its nest was directly outside of the neighbor's house. One evening, I was walking by this neighbor. I asked him, "Hey, can you hear that bird at night? Do you know what kind of bird it is?" He says, "No, I don't." But then a few days later he stops me and says, "You know, I do hear it. I think it's a catbird. Man, that thing is loud." That bird that he was probably used to until I pointed it out, he could now clearly hear, and it sung out every night, and still continues each summer. 4. 15 years ago, my company developed a unique software for a big company. It's basically a software that manages the workforce. For that initial work years ago, they didn't want to pay the whole upfront cost to write the software, so they agreed to a reduced price, but with a never-ending annual license, which included support and maintenance. The product had been stable, so we mostly collected the annual license fee and did some basic support here and there, and added incremental features for a fee, so we recouped our fees and got a better long-term outcome. But a couple of years ago they changed their procurement and payment systems, and we had several invoices go unpaid. Some were 36 months late. Not because of technical reasons, but because the monthly email reminders were ignored, and because the threads that went from one month to the other, and from manager to manager, were just insane with hundreds of replies, and up to 50 people CC'd at one point, going over the same topics over and over again constantly, them asking for proof of the work, for proof of the work request, proof of managerial approval of the work, for copies of the invoices that we sent, that were already 4 times in the email thread, and so on. Right when we thought we would wrap up the thread, someone would say, "Wait, what are we talking about again?" And the whole thread would just continue with another iteration of the craziness. It was a nightmare, enough to make anyone lose their marbles. We eventually got paid, but goddamn. About 5 years ago, they called us and said, "We're bringing in new back-end systems at our production facility, so you have to do a major update to your software so that it can talk to our new systems. The new systems will be online by January 1st. So it's critical that no matter what, your system must be ready by then." So we agree on a price for the updates. We're told the contract will follow the following week. They assign a project manager, coordinator, and we start working because we need every minute if we're going to make that deadline. Except the contract doesn't come. Instead, we're put in touch with the procurement guy to finalize the details. Let's call this guy Ashish. Ashish was also on the previous email threads and not exactly on the ball then, a warning sign. Time. Tick. Tock. First, Ashish proceeds to ask me for the old master contract. Then he tells me that he doesn't understand it, and that we'll need a new master contract in the future. Then he says he doesn't understand what the software does, and as far as he's concerned, it's just a nice-to-have for the company. Then he says it should be free of charge, since it's included in the maintenance and support, but no, the changes they want are 10+ years out, and out of scope from the original requirements. Of course, we're polite as we answer, but there's something about the way he writes and asks for stuff that makes us believe he's either just dumb, or severely overloaded and or out of touch, and or our small contract is just a pebble in his shoe. He nitpicks about details of the agreement, about things that make no sense and that clearly show he's totally unaware of the context. Since he's my single point of contact to get the paperwork done, I'm starting to lose patience. We exchanged several drafts, all of which contain more of his impossibly stupid requests and details that are completely unrelated to the task at hand. I mean, who the hell is this guy? I waste a ton of hours explaining what the project is, why XYZ is necessary, and why ABC clause doesn't apply. Once we eventually reach a good enough draft ready for me to sign, it doesn't come. He calls me one day and says he wants to redo the whole thing because he thinks it's not properly framed and wants me to make him a new proposal, and we have to get a new master agreement anyway. Me make a new proposal. For what? We already agreed to the price and wording for what the new update does. He then proceeds to tell me that as far as he's concerned, it should even be free, so the new contract should take that into account. I explained to him that it's definitely not a nice-to-have, that if we don't get this done, production will grind to a halt due to the particular problem that our software solves. So I refuse, telling him we're already well underway with the work. He says fine, and says that he'll send the last draft ASAP. A few more weeks go by, and almost every day I email to get status. Nothing. I eventually get a note asking if my new proposal is ready for him to review. Oh, for fuck's sake. I get on the phone with him. We start afresh with a new round of him not understanding anything about the work and the contract. Him discussing issues that are irrelevant, wanting guarantees that make no sense, and a nonsensical wording of the work involved. Oh, and by the way, he now wants to know our cost basis for doing the work because it's too expensive, and we'll have to review the price down. Yet again, during all this time, he seems genuinely confused or unaware of context or the pressures the company is under with this. And more I'm flabbergasted as to why this guy is in charge of negotiating our contract. As much as I explain again and again, nothing seems to register, or if it does, we're back to square one the following day. I'm going completely insane dealing with this. One day, over beer, I explained the situation to one of my buddies, and he laughs. And this guy's really having fun, acting dumb, like this is one of the many tactics that procurement people will use to erode all of your patience, in the hope that you'll eventually just throw up your hands in the air and say, fine, either just out of sheer frustration or because the alternative is just no contract, no payment for the work you've already put in. Trust me, this guy knows what he's doing. The proper counter-response to this, just play dumb too. But he knows by now, so withdraw from the negotiations and put him in front of a totally new guy. And have that guy be as clueless as possible and have as little authority as possible, unable to approve any decision. And make him get back to him with unrelated questions and just enough nonsense. Next, tell the procurement guy you're going on vacation and that your team has stopped work until a contract is signed. Maybe he's really dumb, but I doubt it. I think he'll wise up real fast. Brilliant. I got back home from the pub and check Ashish's LinkedIn profile. Senior VP Procurement, Education, Harvard Business School. Right, this guy's not an idiot. He was fucking with me the whole time. Next morning, I talked to my management team and explained the situation. They all get a laugh and are willing to participate in the theatrics. I write Ashish an email saying that I am putting him in touch with Arnold, CC'd, and that I was taking vacation, 3-month sabbatical, and that we will resume the work once the agreement is signed. It worked perfectly. The ignorance my coworker played was brilliant, completely believable. Ashish became increasingly relentless in his emails, and suddenly transformed from being the clueless guy to the sharp exec he actually was, as he realized he might cause the project to not get delivered on time. In the end, we signed the document a few weeks after Arnold took over. We didn't give an inch. We delivered on time. The lower managers at Big Company were relieved. They too were completely flabbergasted with the stupid email chains, but they were powerless to intervene. 5. This was years ago when I worked at a call center for a cell phone company working customer service. We were an inbound call center for customer service. On the floor, there were several teams of like 10 to 20 people, each with a team lead. There was this one team leader who was always trying to overperform to get her manager's favor. They got bonuses for certain things, and the better her team did, the more she would make. I hated this manager. Let's call her Shirley. Shirley was always trying to get us to do stuff beyond the job description to try to impress her boss. She always insisted on blasting shitty music right next to our cubicles to try and get us hype. Our job was to answer phone calls, and it made it very hard to have to try to hear customers with this music blasting. She also would be constantly shouting out metrics and just losing it when someone got a sale. It made it very distracting. My job was just a simple customer service rep answering phones. Shirley was kind of like the main boss's pet. She could get away with doing things different because she always whipped her team into overperforming and was very strict on the team to perform. She is the type of boss who would be staring over your shoulder, breathing down your neck, watching everything you were doing and criticizing every move. This was very patronizing to me, as I was a top performer. I did not need to be babysat or corralled around. I knew how to do the job. I was put on her team at one point. She was driving us hard, making us do crazy things to try to get sales or improve various metrics, micromanaging the living shit out of us. I put up with most of it because I needed that job at the time. But one day she pushed me too hard. We were general customer service, so we handled billing issues, new service, account maintenance, etc. If you ever worked in a call center, you know there are a bunch of departments. We didn't handle cancellations because this was the department retention job. If a customer ever threatened to cancel, switch providers, or started mentioning other providers' deals, we were to transfer them immediately to retention. Retention was specifically trained to try to curb cancellations. They were a higher-level department than customer service, and had special deals, discounts, and promotions to try to work with upset customers looking to cancel to keep them. As customer service, one of our metrics is transfers, keeps tabs on how many times each employee sent a transfer to another department. Getting too many of these looked bad, but sometimes was unavoidable. We were trained to own the call, to try to prevent transfers and resolve the customer's issues on your call. But certain situations are beyond the scope of my job. I simply don't have the tools to effectively do some things, such as retain customers and curb churn. Shirley wasn't having this, though. I guess the team's transfers were high or something, but one call she was plugged into my headset listening as I work. Customer calls in super irate, pissed about his billing. I am trying to work the call and review his account and discuss options, but nothing we can offer is satisfactory. He is threatening to go to another provider, which will get him a way better deal and pay off his cancellation fees. At this point, per our manual from the cell phone company itself, I was to immediately transfer this customer to retention in order to try to save his business. They had better deals than I was able to give, and it explicitly states in our manual and rulebook to transfer them as soon as they mention cancellation. Well, where I worked at, we did not work directly for the cell phone company itself. We were a third-party company who was contracted to do work for the cell phone company as our client. As such, part of the contract the cell phone company provides is an online manual on how to handle situations and what we are supposed to be doing. If we are found to not be in compliance with how the client wants us to handle situations, it could be terms for cancellation of the contract. This was a very big deal, because if the site lost the client's contract, it means everyone working that call center would be out of a job. So this customer is cussing at me, yelling at me about cancelling his service. Shirley mutes my phone and is telling me not to transfer this caller. She wants me to go above and beyond and do another department's job that I wasn't trained in, didn't have access to their details or resources. Shirley used to work in retention, and was saying she could show me how to handle this and save the customer and not get a transfer. I don't make enough to be doing two department's roles in one, fuck this. Plus, the customer was cussing me out, and I'm done trying. I unmute the call and tell this customer I am transferring him and transfer him to retention. Shirley loses it, freaks out, storms off into her manager's office, determined to write me up for non-compliance. A few hours later, I get the notice that she has written me up, and I get the email to confirm my write-up for refusing to listen to her. Fuck this. I did exactly as our rulebook states. I don't sign it. She threatens me by saying we will be having a meeting with HR by the end of day because I didn't sign it. Whatever. We get into HR. They are pulling the write-up and we are talking about it. Shirley is in the meeting with us, thinking I'm about to get fired. I always stood up for my rights and would challenge a lot of other questionable tactics she used as a team lead. She was excited. It was the day she was going to get rid of me, so she thought. Well, HR is reviewing the situation. Well, in most instances, we review the write-up and compare it to what policy is. Shirley says, he was disobedient and needs to be punished. He directly disobeyed my directions and transferred a call when I told him not to. Per our rulebook provided by the client themselves, it specifically states to immediately transfer the caller in this situation. You can find the policy on XYZ page. The client specifically stated to transfer, and this is per policy. Since he followed policy to a T, we cannot do anything here. We are dismissing this write-up. Shirley then got a talking to from HR about compliance and the client's wishes, and how disregarding this could cost the site their contract and everyone's job. Satisfying, to say the least. She backed down and stopped messing with me after that, until I eventually got to transfer into another team. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 112. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. If you enjoyed the video, then please do share it with all your friends and family, and subscribe if you haven't already done so, and like it, and sell me the soul of your second-born child. I've got plenty of firstborns now. We did well off the last request I made. Now I need a few seconds for variety. What are we doing? This is the third, I think? Yes, it's the third. And first revenge of the year. Okay, I'm trying to give myself a few extra days off, just because I want to do some relaxing. So I'm getting some recording done early, which means videos should hopefully go up on time. So with that, I'm going to head off for now and get back to work. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.